Lately there's been this strange, almost electric feeling in the mornings. It's hard to explain, but it's like a spark I haven't felt in years. I'll catch myself standing at the bay window, my heart fluttering in a way that feels, well, unexpected. You'd think at 53, I'd know better than to let someone half my age stir up such emotions, but here I am. It's as if something dormant inside me has suddenly woken up. Hi, I'm Valerie. I'm married to a wonderful man named Martin. We live in a beautiful home in Buffalo, New York, with a lush garden that demands constant care. Martin's job takes him out of town often, leaving me alone for days at a time. It was during one of those long, quiet stretches that I first noticed Brendan, our gardener. Brendan's young, maybe 25, possibly 26. He's lean, athletic, and moves with an ease that makes his work seem almost artistic. Whether he's trimming hedges or mowing the lawn, the way his muscles shift and his skin glistens under the sun is, well, mesmerizing. I told myself it was harmless, a fleeting distraction, nothing more. After all, who wouldn't enjoy watching someone so skilled and confident in their work? But as the days passed, I found myself lingering at the window longer, the pull to watch him growing stronger than I ever expected. Then one day, on a whim, I decided to step out of the shadows. Martin was away on business, and the house felt emptier than usual. Seeing Brendan trimming the bushes near the porch, I called out, "Would you like something to drink?" He paused, startled, and turned to look at me. His eyes, deep, warm, and inviting, met mine for the first time. "No, thank you, ma'am," he replied with a polite smile. His voice was soft, his hair dark and curly, damp from the heat. "Please call me Valerie," I said, returning his smile. "And I insist. It's way too hot for you to be out here without a break." After a moment of hesitation, he nodded. "All right, thank you. I'm Brendan, by the way." I hurried inside to pour him a glass of lemonade, my hands trembling slightly. What was I doing? This felt ridiculous, yet I couldn't help myself. When I handed him the drink, he accepted it with gratitude, drinking deeply. I watched as a drop of lemonade trickled down his chin, which he quickly wiped away, flashing me a grin. "Thank you," he said, handing back the empty glass. "That really hit the spot. Would you like some more?" I asked, eager to extend the moment. He shook his head. "No thanks. I should get back to work." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "All right, but let me know if you change your mind." From that day on, this became our little routine. Whenever Martin was away, I'd offer Brendan a drink or a snack, and we'd chat. He'd tell me about his passion for gardening, something he'd learned from his grandfather. I'd share stories from my younger days, of trips and dreams that now felt like distant memories. It all felt innocent, friendly even, but there was an unspoken tension, a current of something deeper that neither of us dared acknowledge. One evening, after one of our conversations, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My eyes sparkled, my cheeks were flushed, and for the first time in years I felt truly alive. Still, I knew better. I was married. I had a family, a reputation, a life built on trust and stability. And Brendan, he was so much younger. The whole idea was absurd. But no matter how much I tried to reason with myself, I couldn't shake the pull I felt toward him. When Martin returned from his business trip, everything shifted. Brendan continued his work in the garden, but I couldn't invite him in anymore. Instead, I had to watch from afar, my heart aching with a longing I refused to fully admit. Martin's schedule had shifted, and he was spending more time at home. At first, I told myself it was a good thing, a chance for us to reconnect, but deep down I couldn't ignore my growing frustration. I missed those brief moments with Brendan. I missed how his eyes would light up when he saw me, the quiet thrill of our conversations, and the anticipation of what might come next if I dared to take another step. Martin's work no longer required frequent trips out of town, leaving me restless and uneasy. Every morning I'd find myself at the window again, watching Brendan work, the ache of longing tightening in my chest. My thoughts were consumed with him. His easy movements, the sound of his laugh, and that unmistakable kindness in his eyes. One morning, as I watched him from the bay window, my heart sank. I saw something I hadn't noticed before, a flicker of disappointment in his expression. He glanced toward the house, his gaze lingering for just a moment before he returned to trimming the hedges. It struck me then. He must have thought I'd lost interest, that I didn't care anymore. That realization unraveled something inside me. Tucked away in my jewelry box was a scrap of paper with Brendan's number on it. He'd given it to me weeks ago when I'd asked about a rare plant in the garden. "If you ever need help with it, just give me a call," he'd said. I knew, of course, that it wasn't just about the plant. It was a small connection, a bridge between us now that our moments together had grown scarce. I clung to that piece of paper like a lifeline. Waiting for Martin to leave again felt pointless. His business had him firmly planted at home, and I couldn't keep ignoring the restless energy building inside me. One night, as he snored softly beside me, I made up my mind. Quietly, I slipped out of bed, my heart racing, and crept downstairs. In the living room, I reached for the jewelry box, hands trembling as I unfolded the scrap of paper and dialed Brendan's number. "Hello." His voice was groggy, a mix of confusion and concern. "It's me," I whispered. "Valerie. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Ma'am. Is everything all right?" His concern made my breath hitch. Summoning every ounce of courage, I murmured, "Could you come over? Just for a little while. I'd like to talk." The pause on the other end felt like an eternity. Then he sighed softly. "All right. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I hung up, my pulse pounding in my ears. What was I doing? What if Martin woke up? What if Brendan thought I was out of my mind? But I couldn't back out now. Rushing to the guest room, I pulled out a dress I hadn't worn in years, a soft, flowing fabric that flattered my figure. I adjusted my hair in the mirror, smoothing out the lines on my face. I wasn't a young woman anymore, but I still carried myself with pride. I stayed active, practiced yoga, I looked good for my age, and tonight that had to be enough. When the doorbell rang, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. Brendan stood there, looking nervous and a little disheveled. He was dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, his hair slightly tousled from sleep. "Come in," I whispered, stepping aside. He hesitated, glancing around as though someone might be hiding in the shadows. "Is your husband?" "He's asleep," I reassured him. "Don't worry. We won't wake him." Slowly, he stepped inside, his gaze darting around the dimly lit hallway. I led him to the guest room, where he stood awkwardly near the door, hands stuffed into his pockets. "Valerie," he started, his voice quiet, uncertain. "Please," I interrupted gently. "Just call me Valerie." "Valerie," he said again, more softly this time. What's going on?" I felt my nerves spike. This wasn't like those casual conversations over lemonade in the garden. This was different, something far more daring. Taking a step closer, I said softly, I miss talking to you. It's been so long, and I felt like," my voice faltered, but I forced myself to continue. "I felt like you might have thought I didn't care anymore." His eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw confusion. But there was something else too, something unspoken that made my breath catch. Was it curiosity? A reflection of my own feelings? "I missed it too," he admitted, his voice barely audible. The words sent a rush of warmth through me, and I stepped closer again. His breathing quickened, and I could see the hesitation in his posture, but he didn't back away. "You've been such a bright spot in my days," I said softly. "Your kindness, your energy. It's meant so much to me." He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am. I mean, Valerie." I reached out and rested my hand lightly on his arm. "And you've done so much more than that." He froze under my touch, his face flushing crimson. There was a vulnerability in his expression that made my heart ache, but also an honesty that stirred something deep within me. There was a vulnerability in Brendan's expression that softened something deep inside me. He was so young, so unsure, and here I was standing before him, feeling like a character from some old romance novel. I wasn't sure what I was offering, or what he might even want, but the intensity of the moment wrapped around us like a cocoon. "Brendan," I murmured softly, reaching out to him. He looked up, his eyes wide and full of uncertainty. "It's okay to feel nervous," I said gently. "If you'd rather leave, I'd understand." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly, but instead of stepping back, he shook his head slowly. "Whoa. I don't want to leave," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't really know what I'm doing, but I don't want to go." My heart fluttered at his honesty. Offering him a warm, reassuring smile, I took a small step back, giving him space to breathe. He looked so out of place in the softly lit room, as if caught between two worlds, the capable, confident gardener I'd admired and the young man now standing before me, uncertain and vulnerable. "Let's just sit and talk for a bit," I suggested gently, motioning to the small sofa by the window. "No rush. I just want to spend some time with you." He nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly, and followed me to the sofa. I sat down first, smoothing my dress over my knees. Brendan hesitated for a moment before sitting at the very edge of the cushion, his posture stiff and nervous. So I began softly, turning to face him with a smile. "What do you do when you're not tending to gardens?" The question was simple, but it opened the door to a conversation that seemed to stretch time. As we talked, I could see the tension slowly draining from his frame. His shoulders relaxed, and the smile that crept onto his face felt unguarded, genuine. The light in his eyes shifted, sparking with curiosity and ease as we connected. Yet, I couldn't help but notice the way his gaze occasionally flickered toward me, the neckline of my dress, my hands as they rested on my lap. Each time he'd quickly look away, his cheeks darkening with embarrassment. It was endearing in a way, seeing this strong, capable young man reduced to shy glances and quiet uncertainty. "Brendan," I said softly, drawing his gaze back to mine, "do you find me attractive?" The question hung in the air, heavy and laced with unspoken implications. His eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, he seemed to struggle with the weight of it. His mouth opened, then closed, words failing him as his throat worked to form a response. Finally, he gave up trying to speak and simply nodded, his face flushed. "Yes," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Yes, I do." Warmth spread through me at his admission, bolstering my courage. Leaning just a little closer, I offered him a smile that I hoped conveyed sincerity. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice low. "I think you're very handsome, too." He blinked, as if the words were too much to process. Then, slowly, almost cautiously, he reached out and rested his hand over mine. His fingers were rough, calloused from hard work, but his touch was careful, almost reverent. "Valerie," he started, his voice trailing off as his eyes searched mine. For what I wasn't sure. Reassurance. Permission. Something unspoken lingered between us. "I don't want to do anything wrong," he said finally, his words trembling with uncertainty. My heart softened at his honesty. Giving his hand a gentle squeeze, I said, "You're not doing anything wrong, Brendan. Promise. I just want you to feel at ease." He looked down at our hands, his fingers tightening slightly around mine, as if holding onto an anchor. "I've never felt like this before," he admitted, his voice raw and vulnerable. His words hit me with an unexpected force, stirring something deep within me. This wasn't just about me longing for connection. It was about him too. In that moment I realized he might need this, need me just as much as I needed him. As I leaned in closer, the air between us seemed to hum with an unspoken connection. He froze, his breath catching, but as I paused, he nodded slightly. "Is this okay?" I whispered, searching his face for any hesitation. "Yes," he breathed, his voice barely audible. "Please, don't stop." I didn't Slowly, he began to respond, his hands hovering awkwardly before finally settling gently around me. The moment stretched, each second lingering like a fragile thread connecting us. Whatever this was, it was more than words, something unspoken, raw, and deeply human. The tension that had simmered between us for weeks finally reached a breaking point, giving way to something raw and unspoken. It felt both exhilarating and surreal, like stepping into uncharted territory. "I've wanted this for so long," I confessed softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't know if you felt the same." Brendan's gaze met mine, wide and filled with a vulnerability that tugged at my heart. "I did," he murmured, his voice honest and unguarded. I didn't think you'd ever look at me like that." I reached up, brushing a stray strand of hair from his forehead, letting my fingers linger for just a moment. "Well, I do," I whispered, offering a gentle smile. "And if you'll let me, I'd like to show you." He swallowed hard, looking at me with a mix of shyness and longing. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, he whispered, "I want that too." I took his hand, leading him toward the guest room. Each step felt suspended in time, every movement laced with an unspoken understanding. When we stopped, he looked down at me, his expression torn between hesitation and desire. "It's okay, Brendan," I said softly, my tone calm and steady. "Have you ever done this before?" I asked, not wanting to overwhelm him. He shook his head slowly, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. "Whoa. I mean, not like this." There was something tender in his honesty, something that made me want to ease his uncertainty. "Just follow my lead," I murmured, my voice low and reassuring. We took our time, letting the moment unfold naturally, without pressure or expectation. Brendan's hesitance melted gradually as he began to trust himself, and me. There was a sweetness to his uncertainty, a gentleness that only deepened my desire to make him feel safe and valued. With each small step forward, his confidence grew, his movements becoming more assured. The night stretched on, every second blurring into the next. The connection between us was unlike anything I'd felt in years, a mix of vulnerability, trust, and a quiet understanding. For those hours, it felt as if the world beyond the walls of the guest room had faded away. Eventually, we lay side by side, the room silent except for the sound of our breathing. I turned my head to look at him, my heart tightening at the sight of his flushed cheeks and the quiet smile on his lips. But as much as I wanted to stay in that moment, reality began creeping back. The clock on the nightstand reminded me of the risks, of the thin line we had walked tonight. With a reluctant sigh, I propped myself up on one elbow and looked down at him. "Brendan, I think you should go," I said gently, my voice tinged with regret. "This isn't goodbye. We'll see each other again. But I need to be careful." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression a mix of resignation and understanding. Then, with a small, bittersweet smile, he nodded. "'Kay. Get it." We disentangled ourselves slowly, both hesitant to break the quiet intimacy of the moment. When he was ready, I walked him to the back door, each step deliberately light to avoid waking Martin. Brendan turned to me one last time, his eyes soft and full of unspoken emotion. "Thank you, Valerie," he whispered, his voice thick. "For everything." I smiled, my chest tightening with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "No, Brendan. Thank you for making me feel alive again." I gently closed the door behind him and watched as he disappeared into the darkness. The house felt impossibly quiet as I stood there, my thoughts swirling. Guilt, relief, and excitement vied for attention in my mind, but alongside those emotions was a strange, unfamiliar calm. For the first time in years, I felt like a part of me that had been dormant had awakened. With quiet steps, I returned to the bedroom and slipped under the covers beside my husband. Martin was still sound asleep, his face peaceful and undisturbed. I glanced at him, and while the affection I felt for him was still there, it felt distant now. A part of me had been given to someone else tonight, someone who had reminded me of a piece of myself I thought I'd lost. Turning onto my side, I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the night's events. I thought about Brendan. His gentleness, his uncertainty, the way he'd trusted me. Curling up under the sheets, I let the emotions wash over me. I knew what I'd done was a betrayal, a secret I'd have to carry alone. Yet, in some inexplicable way, it had brought me back to life. For the first time in years, I felt a spark, a flicker of energy and purpose I hadn't realized I was missing. With a soft sigh, I closed my eyes and let myself drift into sleep, a small, bittersweet smile on my lips. I didn't know what the future held or whether I'd dare to cross that line again. But for now I was content. For now that small spark was enough.